That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and today we're going to be talking about collectivist favors. You know, the ones that they just can't help but shower on us, or at least expect us to appreciate as they're forced on us. Before we do that, though, I want to start out today's episode with a little bit of good news. Could you use some good news? I think most of us could. Seems like we've been headed in a very non-productive direction for some time. So here's the good news. This was a tweet that I picked up on earlier today that points out how after months of pushback from citizens, the Kootenai Metropolitan Planning Organization has canceled its plans to install hundreds of new surveillance cameras to, quote, monitor traffic, wink, wink, in the North Idaho region. The meeting was packed. The lesson here, of course, is that free government requires active citizens. It's really good. And I know it sounds paranoid. Well, why are you afraid of these cameras for? Why are you suspicious of them? And, you know, maybe we could follow the little Red Riding Hood, Grandma, what big eyes you have, or how many eyes you have, keeping an eye on us. Yes, the better to watch you, my dear. It's really the better to surveil you or to observe you. And if you want to, expand your brain a little bit, look up the concept of panopticon. It goes back to the 1700s. Jeremy Bentham was a designer of prisons. The panopticon was the kind of prison where every prisoner was always under observation at every time. We are fast approaching the point where we live in an electronic kind of panopticon. So I'm happy to see citizens in North Idaho stepping up and saying, this really is not what we need. Yes, I know it's supposed to make us feel safe, but it becomes very big brotherish in a hurry. So again, there's the good news. Citizens stood up and said, don't do this. Not a good idea. And it sounds like for the time being, government listened. So let's talk a little bit about, again, the collectivist favors that are being showered upon us. I know right now a number of news organizations are taking a victory lap here and celebrating. U.S. District Court temporarily blocks enforcement of Idaho transgender bathroom law. In Roe versus Critchfield, plaintiffs allege state's school bathroom law discriminates against transgender students. Now, we'll delve into the story here a little bit. This was hotly debated about, should people who were born biological males be going into the girls' restroom or girls' locker rooms? And I think reasonable, normal people would say, no, that creates tension and it creates conflict where there was none before. Society, certain woke decisions must be made, or so the progressives and the woke would tell us. Well, a U.S. District Court apparently agreed, deciding Thursday it would temporarily block enforcement of an Idaho law meant to prevent transgender students from using school restrooms that correspond with their gender identity. Now, I have to point this out. Damn the students who are normal and who are just trying to live their lives and not, create drama for else. But comes a student who is living in, first of all, a fictitious world in which if I feel this way, I must be this way, and everybody must be forced to acknowledge me as such. And now we're seeing legal clout being given to them to impose and to draft others into their fantasy. Senate Bill 1100, which took effect July 1st, would have required public schools to maintain 2 separate multi-occupancy restrooms, showers, changing facilities, and overnight accommodations for students based on their sex assigned at birth. Also, it would have allowed students to sue the school for a minimum fine of $5,000 if they encounter a transgender student in the bathroom. Now, something that has to be pointed out here, if a person is keeping private what needs to be private, it's probably not going to be that much of an issue, really. I don't care what's going on behind that stall door. I don't want to know, and I wouldn't want people prying into my private business either. But that's not been the pattern. And we have seen this not just with students, but especially with adults who identify as transgender, going into public restrooms that are meant for the opposite sex of what they were born, and engaging in disgusting displays because because I'm protected, because I'm special. It's wrong. And it took some shopping for a judge who was willing to play the game of judicial activism to now impose this on students in Idaho, or at least to impose a temporary restraining order. Now, the U.S. District Court decided Thursday it would temporarily block enforcement of this law, but in a legal order, the U.S. District Court granted the request for a temporary restraining order against the law, preventing schools from enforcing that mandate ahead of the school year. So what happens when the school year starts? I don't know. Does it go into effect? The lawsuit Roe v. Critchfield was filed in federal court July 6 by Lambda Legal, Munger, Tollers, Olson, and Alturas Law Group. The attorneys filed the lawsuit on behalf of Boise High School's Sexuality and Gender Alliance. Wow. Do you remember the days when high schools didn't have to have that kind of, a thought police in their presence? And Rebecca Rowe, a rising seventh grade transgender student in the Boise School District who is using anonymity to protect her identity. By the way, the fact that this story is referring to her with female pronouns, I think is a pretty strong indicator. We're talking about a biologically born male who wants access to the girls' locker rooms and the girls' bathrooms. Now, if I'm wrong on that, please feel free to correct me, but that seems to be the pattern, and I feel pretty safe in making that supposition. Plaintiffs are suing State Superintendent of Education Debbie Critchfield, the Idaho State Board of Education, and the Boise School District under the claim that the law violates the equal protection and due process clauses of the 14th Amendment and Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972 by singling out transgender youth for discriminatory treatment. Discrimination is a part of our everyday lives. The route that you choose when you're driving to work, what you will eat for breakfast in the morning, what you choose to purchase when you go into a store, that's all a matter of choice. You choose one thing over another because it best suits your needs. This is one of those cases where, I guess this is just where collectivists love to force one-size-fits-all solutions on everybody, and if you don't like it, well, you can lump it. And it makes me wonder, how far would this have to go in order for parents to say, enough? I'm pulling my child out of the schools and will homeschool or private school or something like that. I'm not sure I want to know how far it would have to go because we've already come ridiculously far. Lambda Legal Senior Counsel Peter Wren said the court's ruling is a relief for transgender students in Idaho who, he said, are entitled to equal treatment and respect at school. This is not equal treatment. This is preferential treatment, and it's mandated acceptance, mandated validation. It's not just respect. People would respect privacy, but are they respecting the privacy of others? Apparently, this is just a one-way street. Wren said in a press release, when school is back in session, they should be focusing on classes, friends, and activities like everyone else, rather than worrying about where they're allowed to use the restroom. No one's return to school should be met with a return to discrimination. Well, obviously, they're going to be focusing on some activism too, or this wouldn't be an issue, now would it? So what options does that leave parents? And I assume that there are parents who are concerned enough that maybe it's time that they really want to, maybe there's somewhere else for my kids, since the public school system seems to be bending the knee, not just bending the knee, but prostrating itself before this woke agenda, which leads us to the discussion of privatizing education. You wonder why people want to privatize it, why they want to separate school and state? Well, this is one of many reasons why. Let's enter Steve Birch. Representative Birch has been out there knocking doors, and he's got some thoughts on privatizing education. Look at that glower. Where have I seen that before? That is one angry looking face. It's, oh yes, that's right, Lord of the Rings. I think that's the last time I saw a visage that upset. Here's what Steve Birch has to say as he pushes back on the idea of offering alternatives to the public school monopoly, the government-run school monopoly. He says Idaho will spend $2.3 billion on K-12 public education in 2024. There are powerful out-of-state forces, he darkly warns, who want to get their hands on that money. Some are driven by profit, others by political ideology, religious beliefs, or a combination of interests. Yes, but certainly those who are part of the system, including the teachers' unions and so forth, they couldn't be driven by any of those things, especially political ideology or religious beliefs. And I'm talking about the woke religion. But they all share one common goal, says Steve Birch: shift your public school dollars to the private sector. Okay, hold up there, Steve. Let's take just a moment here. What exactly makes a public school dollar different from any other dollar in my wallet? This is a bit of rhetorical sleight of hand that he's engaging in here. Your public school dollars. Oh, do I have public school dollars in my wallet? You want to show me which ones are public school dollars versus non-public school dollars? They're all taxpayer dollars, is my point. So let's not pretend that, these came down from heaven, absolutely inscribed and destined to be nothing but public school dollars. That's one possible place they could be spent. But if the public schools are not doing their job, well, maybe people need a choice. So here's Steve's attempt to connect some of the dots in privatizing the education, or the privatizing the education playbook. And boy, does he go off on this one. First of all, he tells us that privatizing public education will make public schools look worse than other public school or than other school choices. Really? I mean, are we talking competition here? He says the legislature does this by continually underfunding public education. What did he say? We were spending $2.3 billion in 2024. Okay, I believe that is the highest amount ever spent, and yet he's spreading the mantra, though, they're continually underfunded. Schools can't meet parental expectations, accommodate growth, or hire and retain experienced teachers when salaries are not competitive and buildings are falling apart. Now, there is actually some truth to the idea that there are more students coming in. There is need for more schools. The great influx of people who have moved to the Gem State, I'm sure, has contributed to this. However, there is nothing that says that they can only choose from government-run schools and nothing else. So if you want to lighten that load, offer some competition, offer choice to those parents who want to have more of a say in their child's education. He says Idaho has a backlog of over $1 billion in K through 12 school building maintenance, and we're still at or near the bottom in per student investment, even after having a $2.1 billion surplus and a recent budget increase. This makes other school choices look more attractive by comparison. You know what makes them more attractive by comparison is the fact that those other school choices may actually be offering things to your kids that don't include mind laundering and woke programming to prepare them to become new leftist activists. That's a possibility. But again, the idea that, well, we're still at or near the bottom in per student investment. When he says investment, he means spending. Per pupil spending is not an accurate measure of the student performance. And some of the highest per pupil spending districts in the country have some of the worst performance. We're talking like Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Chicago. They spend a ton of money on their students, and their students regularly are near the very bottom of the test scores and the bottom of literacy scores. So that dog ain't going to hunt, Steve, to put it colloquially. Number two, he says it will undermine confidence in public schools. Oh, really? Oh, I wouldn't have thought that was possible. Propaganda campaigns incite fear and anger against local schools. Parents are bombarded with what Steve is calling false claims about porn in libraries, groomers in classrooms, and student indoctrination. Okay, I share examples of this probably about every other episode of this show. This is not a figment of someone's imagination. It's well documented, and it's even being defended by some who say, well, if it is happening, it's right and it's good. You're denying our students, a chance to grow up with a well-rounded education if you don't let them see books about how to engage in deviant sexual behavior, how to question their identity, and, how to question whether maybe they should be undergoing some kind of, gender shift because of that confusion. Steve says nonstop postings on social media perpetuate these inflammatory accusations. No, Steve, it's the truth that makes people go, ooh, I'm not so sure I want my kid in that school. And this is great. Oh, I wonder who he could be talking about here. Self-proclaimed think tanks funded by third parties produce official-looking reports that create a false perception of legitimacy to these manufactured fears. Okay, let's pull the Band-Aid off, Steve. The Idaho Freedom Foundation, which is funded by donors, private donors, people who philanthropically want to put their money where their mouth is and support causes that they believe in, including the cause of freedom, including the cause of limited government, greater fiscal responsibility, more personal responsibility. A self-proclaimed think tank. Yeah, what credential would be acceptable to you, Steve? Does it need to have some kind of accreditation from one of your vaunted Ivy League organizations, or is it something else? The bottom line is he doesn't want to believe that they are doing serious investigative and number crunching reports and showing that they're connecting the dots. They are absolutely showing the proof of where school districts and administrators have lied about, for instance, very explicit books being made available to kids in public school libraries. Don't believe me? Go to idahofreedom.org. Just click on a couple of articles. I'm not saying you have to believe them. I'm saying just check it out for yourself and see if things don't add up. Steve is whistling past the graveyard here when he says, well, it gives a false perception of legitimacy. That's not a false perception. The legitimacy is there because the facts seem to bear out those concerns. But, hey, Good try to deflect and gaslight us into thinking it's not really happening. All right, number 3. Hide the facts. Legislative leaders tried to kill the Office of Performance Evaluations, which provides factual, according to Steve, in-depth, unbiased research, done by political appointees, and analysis to the legislature. The public wouldn't know about the billion-dollar backlog in school building maintenance if OPE didn't exist. The OPE report revealed that this new information angered political leaders trying to tell a different story. Without facts, false narratives go unchallenged. Yeah, you would know all about that, Steve. That's why you're trying to dismiss the other concerns as false narratives. Number 4, legislative intimidation. Okay. Public school privatization would lead to legislative intimidation. New laws are making classrooms a hostile workplace. For whom? Activists? Groomers? Whom? This includes bills that threaten to sue educators, imprison librarians, fine school districts, muzzle teachers, and empower the Attorney General, oh boy, to aggressively prosecute the targets of these punitive laws. No wonder teachers are leaving Idaho. Talk about those laws, though, Steve. Flesh it out for us. What exactly are those laws intending to stop? What are they trying to discourage? If it's teaching children to hate themselves or to hate others based on their skin color, or to hate their nation based on just a one-dimensional view of American history, or for that matter, to embrace weird, unnatural deviancy in the name of being inclusive and diverse, those aren't things that necessarily need to be taught in public schools. We used to do pretty well with just the facts. But lately, it's kind of a woke indoctrination center. And when people push back, not because they're trying to be mean, not because they're trying to imprison librarians, sue educators, muzzle teachers, and empower the Attorney General, but because they don't want to see their kids turned into zombies. No wonder teachers are leaving Idaho. Well, maybe some of them are leaving because they're finding that they don't want to be part of a system that is becoming more readily corrupt by the day. That's a possibility, too. Steve says they promote school choice, scare quotes, and education freedom. Obviously things he doesn't believe in. These can't be real. That's why I have to put quotations around them. This is clever rhetoric, but it is meaningless, says Steve Birch, since Idahoans already have a myriad of education choices, none of which are going away. He means within the government school system. Oh, you have lots of choices within the government school system. Yeah, it's like you can only shop at one store. This is a company store, but hey, look at all the choices you have. He says it's not about having a choice, but rather having you pay for someone else's choice. No, I believe they're paying for their choice too. If you're going to be taxed, though, why shouldn't parents have the ability to make the choice about what's best for their kids? He says a recent in-depth investigation revealed a vast network of powerful forces, probably from Mordor, funneling money into Idaho to promote and sell their alternative education choices to the public. He doesn't want people to have choice. He doesn't want the competition that would bring better alternatives to the forefront. I love how he just pretends that, well, you already have a whole bunch of choices, just as long as you do them within this monopolistic governmental system. I don't know where that mindset comes from, but that's part of the collectivist favors that the political class likes to pound down on us and expect us to be grateful and thank them for forcing upon us. Steve says the 2023 bill tried to hit a home run and failed. However, lobbyists behind privatizing public education will be back, fronted by their legislative allies. And why not? School choice has actually gained a toehold and actually been passed in many states throughout this year. It's going to happen, especially over Steve's protests, but it's going to happen. Expect to see legislation next year that allows public tax dollars. Is there any other kind? They come from the public, but they actually come from private individuals and private businesses who are actually producing something of value. So when he says public, this is code word for collective. Collective tax dollars to pay for private and religious school tuition in limited amounts and isolated situations. Well, if it's so limited and isolated, why are you so concerned? It's the idea that the state should be able to take all this money, but you should have no say over your child's education or directing where that money goes in terms of helping to educate your child. And finally, He says it would kill public education with vouchers, which is that's the code. That's kind of the cuss word for anti-school choice people, deceptively called education savings accounts or ESAs. An attempt was made earlier this year, says Steve, to convert most of the $2.3 billion public education budget into checks sent to parents to spend however they want. Oh, listen to this, without accountability. To whom, Steve? Accountability to the government? To you? The teachers' unions? The accountability comes from the private schools who have to compete to earn the patronage of those parents and their kids. If they don't deliver, those parents have the right to pull their kids out and take their money and vote with their wallet by going somewhere else. This would starve Idaho public schools into oblivion, says Steve Birch. All right, he's pretty big on the drama here, but it's clear Steve is not a fan of school choice. He doesn't want people to have an option outside of the government-enforced monopoly. I don't know what all the reasons are. I just know it doesn't ring true. Steve says this is fool's gold. There is no room for compromise. Okay, one way and one way only. Everything under the state, everything within the state, nothing outside the state. Who said that? Was that Mussolini? Anyway, if the legislature allows just a small amount of public tax dollars to be spent on tuition for any private school, your tax dollars must be made available to all types of private schools and religious schools. Once one bill passes, the floodgates open up to flow, again, your public education dollars to the bottom line profits of private sector businesses. Okay, but here's the thing. If those public education dollars being spent on government schools are not producing the results promised, why not send them to private sector businesses who can and must deliver on those promises in order to keep receiving those dollars? Because they have to earn the patronage of those parents and their kids. Answer that one for us, Steve. He finally says your public education tax dollars, again, no different from any other tax dollars, belong in your public schools. This is, again, sleight of hand. They're not my public schools. They're government schools that are forced upon us. You don't have a choice. But he says your dollars belong in those schools and not in the pockets of private business. You know, this statist mindset that anything that's not under the control of the state is somehow by definition out of control. It's tiresome and it's sad. And of course, one of the objections is, well, if people send their kids off to private school, how are they going to get their kids properly socialized? I kind of like how this meme expresses it. Here's the concern. Wow, so you're just going to indoctrinate your kids into your belief system? Yes. That's the one and only correct answer that any parent should not be ashamed to say. Of course I'm going to indoctrinate my kids into my belief system. Because if I don't, someone else is going to try to indoctrinate them into some other belief system, which may or may not reflect the values with which I would like to raise my kids. Whose kids are they anyway? Should we go down that road, or you're not interested in having that discussion right now? Okay, just wondering. All right. Speaking of, pushback against any options in the school system. Oh, man, I don't know if you have been noticing what's been going on in the West Bonner County School District, but Casey Whalen posted this on Twitter earlier. In what looks like a well-orchestrated plan by radical socialists, he's not using that term lightly either. These are people who are very clearly and openly out there supporting leftist causes. In Priest River, Idaho, he says the ploy to recall Chair Rutledge and Brown is well underway. The amount of signage that's up in that school district to favor the recall, he says, it reminds me of a gang war where turf has been heavily tagged in the downtown area by the WCSD strong mob. Either way, Casey says, West Bonner County School District will get the school board they deserve. The only issue for the corrupt individuals in the West Bonner County School District strong camp who continually lie and spin will have their day to eat crow very soon, as you can't stop the truth. And if you're in the area, vote with your tax dollars. I mean, this is so profound that actually they have created a whole new beat at idahoednews.org that now has them exclusively following Brandon Durst. It's like they have a complete story that just storyline that follows him and what's going on there. And the spin, oh my goodness. They don't want alternatives. They don't want that competition, even in ideas. Isn't that a little bit spooky? Speaking of competition and ideas, I know, again, there's some folks doing victory laps over Idaho Supreme Court rules. Attorney General must rewrite ballot titles for coalition's proposed open primary at ranked choice voting initiative. They did not like the way that Attorney General Raul Labrador had made them word the question on the ballot. So the AG is supposed to rewrite the ballots by, 4 o'clock this afternoon. The judge denied the coalition's other request for more time to collect signatures. Now, I don't know if this is the hill that some people want to die on or not, but open primaries are not going to expand your voice. They are not going to make you more potent in terms of your voice being heard politically. But what they will do is water you down in the crowd. And I think it's important to keep people from monkey wrenching, political primaries, particularly the Republican primary, that to the Republican primary be able to say, this is closed and this election is only open to people who have registered as Republican. Oh, but that's not fair. How could they do something like this? Well, we've seen enough gamesmanship, and I mean, even within the Republican Party. I mean, you hear this talk about, the extremists are taking over. No, the extremists are being shown the door. By extremists, I mean the left-wing subversives who are trying to hijack the Republican Party and take it away from its platform, away from its planks and its principles. They're being shown the door because they don't belong there. I mean, they'd be much more at home. They vote along with the Democrats. For crying out loud, Governor Little was actually, he was boasting about something on Twitter earlier this week, the wording almost identical because it was about the same program that the Idaho Democrats were bragging about. It's like they're actually bragging about the same things. They are working together. They're supporting the same causes. Why can't more Republicans see this for what it is? One final note here. This is just fun. I don't have a dog in the fight for the Greater Idaho movement, but I did notice that High Country News has weighed in on this, and the Greater Idaho movement seems more about more than just new land. It's about joining forces with white supremacists. Oh, well, there it is, folks, right there on the internet. They said this was about white supremacy, so I guess the issue's solved. We can't support Greater Idaho. What happened to the idea of fixing Oregon? Instead of fixing Oregon, the Greater Idaho movement seeks to leave it. White supremacists are on board. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm just going to float this possibility. Is there any chance whatsoever that some of the people supporting the Greater Idaho movement may actually be more interested in being free and being left unmolested by a bunch of collectivist Karens who have basically taken control of virtually every institution in the state of Oregon? Because I could see normal people, decent people, saying, yeah, I really don't want to be a part of that. But no, anybody who would support that must be a white supremacist, or so we're being told. That's a classic guilt by association fallacy, by the way. It doesn't hold sway, but the fact that they're throwing down that card on the table tells me there must be some pretty serious interest in some of those eastern Oregon counties that are part of that Greater Idaho movement and talking about maybe freeing themselves again from the collectivist favors being forced on them by the folks in Salem. Nonetheless, let's all do our best to be free. Let's do our best to sort fact from fiction. And I'll see you next week for another episode of Hyde, or Nowhere to Hide, rather.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.